You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. The case against R. Kelly culminating in his 2022 federal conviction in Chicago for child pornography and enticement of minors hinges on a critical legal question. Should the statute of limitations have barred prosecution for alleged crimes from the 1990s and early 2000s? The answer is unequivocally yes. The statute of limitations is a foundational principle in American jurisprudence designed to ensure fairness, protect defendants from stale claims, and to maintain judicial integrity. In R. Kelly's case, the government's decision to prosecute decades-old allegations by relying on a retroactively applied 2003 law referred to as the PROTECT Act violates these principles and constitutes a legally incorrect overreach. This argument will outline why the statute of limitations should have shielded R. Kelly from prosecution, detailing the legal framework, the improper retroactive application of the law and the government's failure to respect constitutional protections. Statutes of limitations exist for a reason. They are not mere technicalities but important pillars of justice rooted in centuries-old legal traditions. These laws set a deadline for initiating legal proceedings, ensuring cases are brought when evidence is fresh, that memories are still reliable, and that all possible witnesses are in fact still available. In criminal law, statutes of limitations protect defendants from the prejudice of defending against allegations so old that exculpatory evidence may have been lost, witnesses may have passed away, or that memories may have faded. The U.S. Supreme Court in fact emphasized this in Stogner v. California 2003 case, stating that statutes of limitations are to be liberally interpreted in favor of repose, meaning they prioritize finality and fairness for the accused. This principle is deeply embedded in our legal system to prevent the government from holding indefinite power to prosecute, which could lead to abuse of the law and therefore injustice. In R. Kelly's case, the allegations stem from conduct allegedly occurring between 1998 and 2010, with many charges tied to the late 1990s. At the time of the alleged acts, the federal statute of limitations for child sex crimes limited prosecutions to within 10 years after the victim reached the age of 18. For an alleged victim who was 14 in 1998, therefore, this would mean the statute of limitations expired by around 2006. Yet R. Kelly was not charged until 2019, well beyond this period. The government's ability to bring these charges relied on the PROTECT Act of 2003, which extended the statute of limitations for certain child sex crimes indefinitely, allowing prosecution as long as the said victim is still alive. The critical issue is whether this PROTECT law can be applied retroactively to crimes allegedly committed before its enactment. The answer, grounded in constitutional law and fairness, is a big no. The PROTECT Act, which was passed in 2003, amended the law to eliminate the statute of limitations for certain federal sex offenses involving minors, stating that such charges could be brought at any time during the victim's lifetime. This was a significant change from the prior law, which imposed a finite limit. The government argued and lower courts agreed that this extended statute could apply to Kelly's alleged crimes from the 1990s because the victims were still alive, and that the original limitations period had not yet expired in 2003 for some charges. This reasoning, however, is legally flawed and disregards fundamental principles of statutory interpretation and constitutional law. First, the U.S. Supreme Court has long held that laws are presumed to apply prospectively unless Congress explicitly states otherwise. In Landgraf v. USA Film Products in 1994, the court clarified that retroactive application of statutes is disfavored because it disrupts settled expectations and can unfairly impose new legal consequences on past actions. The PROTECT Act contains no clear congressional intent to apply its indefinite statute of limitations to crimes committed before 2003. Without such explicit language, therefore, the default presumption is that the law applies only to conduct occurring after its enactment. Applying the 2003 amendment to Kelly's alleged acts from the 1990s violates this principle, as it retroactively extends the time prosecutors could bring charges, altering the legal landscape Kelly relied upon at the time of the alleged conduct. Secondly, The government's retroactive application raises serious constitutional concerns under the ex post facto clause of the U.S. Constitution in Article I, Section 9. In Stogner v. California, the Supreme Court ruled that extending a statute of limitations after it has already expired for a particular crime violates the ex post facto clause, as it effectively revives a prosecution that was previously time-barred. While the government argued that Kelly's case differs because the original statute of limitations had not yet expired in 2003 for some victims, this distinction is tenuous. The Stogner decision emphasized that even extending a still active statute of limitations can infringe on a defendant's rights if it fundamentally alters their ability to prepare a defense. For Kelly, the passage of nearly 2 decades between the alleged acts and the 2019 indictment meant lost evidence, faded memories, and unavailable witnesses, precisely the very harms statutes of limitations are designed to prevent. The government's position, which was shockingly upheld by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, rests on the claim that applying the PROTECT Act to Kelly's pre-2003 conduct is permissible, because he was still subject to prosecution in 2003 when the law changed. This argument, which was articulated by Judge Amy Street Eve in the Seventh Circuit's April 2024 appeal ruling, hinges on a narrow interpretation of Stogner. The court asserted that as long as the original limitations period had not expired by 2003, the new law could extend the time for prosecution indefinitely. This reasoning is legally incorrect and in a way a shame to the appeal judges who upheld it for several reasons. First, it ignores the broader principle in Stogner that statutes of limitations are meant to protect defendants from the prejudice of delayed prosecutions. The Supreme Court in Stogner noted that the aversion to retroactive rulemaking is deeply rooted in our jurisprudence and embodies a legal doctrine centuries older than our republic. By applying the PROTECT Act to conduct from the 1990s, the government effectively stripped Kelly of the repose he was entitled to under the law at the time of the alleged acts. This retroactive extension in fact undermines the predictability and fairness that statutes of limitations provide, as Kelly could not have anticipated that a future law would eliminate the time limit for prosecution. Also important to note, the government's approach disregards the practical realities of defending against decades-old allegations. In Kelly's 2022 Chicago trial, the prosecution relied heavily on testimony and videos from events in the late 1990s, including allegations involving a victim referred to as Jane. The passage of time made it nearly impossible for Kelly to mount an effective defense. Many witnesses who might have corroborated his version of events were no longer available, documents may have been lost, and memories both of the accusers and potential defense witnesses were inevitably less reliable. The statute of limitations exists precisely to prevent such prejudice, yet the government's reliance on their wrong interpretation of the PROTECT Act allowed it to bypass these protections, unfairly stacking the deck against Kelly. The government's interpretation also creates a dangerous precedent. If courts can retroactively apply extended statutes of limitations without clear congressional intent, it opens the door to prosecuting individuals for conduct long past the point where a fair defense is feasible. This erodes the principle of finality in criminal law, allowing the government to pursue charges at its discretion regardless of how much time has elapsed. Such a practice risks selective prosecution and undermines public confidence in the justice system. Beyond statutory interpretation, the retroactive application of the PROTECT Act in Kelly's case raises significant constitutional concerns. The ex post facto clause prohibits laws that retroactively increase punishment, or that alter the legal rules to the detriment of the accused. While the Seventh Circuit argued that Kelly's case does not violate Stogner because the original limitations period was still active in 2003, this overlooks the broader implications of retroactivity equally emphasized in Stogner. By extending the statute of limitations indefinitely, the government effectively changed the rules mid-game, imposing a harsher legal consequence, in this case indefinite exposure to prosecution, than what existed at the time of the alleged acts. This violates the spirit of the ex post facto clause, which seeks to ensure that individuals can rely on the law as it stands when they act. Moreover, the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment requires that criminal prosecutions be fundamentally fair. The Supreme Court has recognized that excessive delay in prosecution can violate due process if it causes actual prejudice to the defendant and the delay is attributable to the government's bad faith or negligence. In Kelly's case, The government waited until 2019 to bring charges for acts from the 1990s. This delay, spanning nearly 2 decades, prejudiced R. Kelly's ability to defend himself as evidence was lost and witnesses became unavailable. The government's failure to act promptly, combined with its reliance on a retroactively applied law, undermines the fairness required by due process. The District Court under Judge Harry Leinenweber in the Seventh Circuit erred in rejecting Kelly's statute of limitations defense. Leinenweber's 2022 ruling, affirmed by the Seventh Circuit in 2024, claimed that the PROTECT Act could apply because the original limitations period had not expired in 2003. This reasoning misinterprets Stogner and fails to grapple with the lack of clear congressional intent for retroactivity. The courts also ignored the practical prejudice Kelly faced due to the delay. The Seventh Circuit's assertion that the jury's even-handed verdict mitigated any unfairness is irrelevant to the statute of limitations issue. The question is not whether the jury was fair, but whether Kelly should have been prosecuted at all given the expired limitations period. Furthermore, the court's reliance on the PROTECT Act's application to Kelly's case overlooks the principle of lenity, which requires that ambiguous criminal statutes be interpreted in favor of the defendant. If there is any doubt about whether the PROTECT Act applies retroactively, the law should be construed to preserve the original statute of limitations protecting Kelly from prosecution. The court's failure to apply this principle further demonstrates the legal incorrectness of the government's approach. The government's decision to prosecute Kelly under a retroactively applied statute of limitations is not just a legal error. It's a very dangerous overreach. By ignoring the original limitations period, the government effectively nullified a critical protection for defendants, setting a precedent that could allow future prosecutions based on long-past conduct. This undermines the rule of law, which depends largely on predictability, repose, and fairness. Individuals must be able to know the legal consequences of their actions at the time they act, not decades later when laws change. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say? To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.